Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into one of the most influential books ever written, Plato's Republic. I mean, for 2,400 years, this thing has been challenging readers to think about the biggest questions out there, and it all boils down to just one.
Yep, that's it. The entire book, all 10 chapters of it, is this epic journey to answer that one single question. It all kicks off with Plato's teacher, the famous Socrates, getting into a pretty intense debate in ancient Athens, trying to figure out what it actually means for a person or a whole city to be just. So the first big challenge gets thrown down by this cynical guy, a sophist named Thrasymachus. He basically crashes the conversation and says, look, justice is simple. It's just a word the powerful use to keep themselves in power. It's this super practical, almost brutal idea, and it's the very thing Socrates is going to spend the rest of the book trying to take apart. This is the spark that really gets the whole investigation going.
So how in the world do you define justice inside a single person? It's kind of hard to see, right? So Socrates comes up with this brilliant idea. He says, let's do a thought experiment. Let's design a perfectly just city, right here, right now, in our minds. The idea is, if we can see what justice looks like on a massive scale, or writ large, then maybe we can shrink it down and see how it works inside the human soul. Socrates starts building this ideal city, which he calls the Callipolis, step by step. At first, it's super simple, just a healthy state with farmers and builders meeting basic needs. But his friend Glaucon immediately complains, calling it a city of pigs because it's so basic. He wants luxuries, art, comforts. Okay, so the city grows into this luxurious state, but that means it needs more land, more resources, which, you guessed it, leads to war. And to fight those wars, you need a special class of protectors, the guardians.
Now, how do you convince everybody to accept their place in this superstructured society? Well, this is where Plato introduces what he calls a magnificent lie, or a noble falsehood. The story goes that every citizen is born from the earth, and the gods mixed a specific metal into each of their souls. The rulers have gold, the soldiers or auxiliaries have silver, and all the farmers and craftsmen have bronze and iron. It's a foundational myth designed to make sure everyone works together for the good of the whole city.
And that brings us to Plato's first and maybe his most famous idea. Who are these golden-souled rulers? They have to be philosophers. Not the rich, not the powerful, not the popular generals. The only people fit to rule, in Plato's view, are philosopher-kings, people who love wisdom and truth above all else. For him, this is the only path to a truly just society. Okay, so what is it about philosophers that makes them so uniquely qualified to be in charge? What makes them so special? To explain this, Plato gives us probably the most powerful metaphor in all of Western philosophy, the allegory of the cave. Just picture this, a group of people who have been chained up in a dark cave their entire lives, since birth. They're chained in such a way that they can only ever look straight ahead at a blank wall. That wall is their entire universe. Now, what they don't know is that behind them, there's a fire. And between the fire and their backs, puppeteers are walking back and forth, holding up objects that cast shadows on the wall in front of them. To the prisoners, these flickering shadows aren't just images. They are reality itself. When they hear the puppeteers' voices, they think the shadows are talking. It's all they know. But what if one of these prisoners were suddenly set free and dragged out of the cave into the sunlight? At first, the light, the truth, would be blinding, painful even. They'd be totally confused and would probably want to run right back to the comfort of the shadows. But eventually, their eyes would adjust. They'd start to see the real objects, a real tree, not just its shadow. And finally, they could look up at the sun itself, the source of all truth and reality. This whole story perfectly illustrates Plato's second huge idea, the theory of forms. The cave represents our everyday physical world, a world of imperfect, shadowy copies. The world outside the cave is the real world, an intellectual realm of perfect, unchanging ideas, or forms. Think of it as the perfect idea of justice or the perfect idea of beauty. The philosopher is fit to rule because they're the one who has climbed out of the cave and has seen reality as it truly is, not just the shadows everyone else is watching. All right, so we've got this blueprint for a just city ruled by these enlightened philosophers. But how does that bring us back to the original question about justice in a single person? Well, this is where Socrates makes an absolutely brilliant connection. He takes the entire structure of the city and maps it directly onto the human soul. And here it is, Plato's third massive idea, the tripartite soul. He says that just like the city, our soul has three distinct parts. First, there's reason, the logical part that loves truth. That's our inner philosopher-king. Then there's spirit, which is our sense of honor, our ambition, our courage. That's like the silver-souled soldiers. And finally, there's appetite, which holds all our desires for things like food, drink, and money, just like the city's producers. So here's the big payoff, the definition of justice we've been waiting for. For Plato, justice isn't about what you do on the outside, it's about your internal state. A just person is someone whose soul is in perfect harmony, where reason is in charge, using spirit to keep the appetites in check. You could say that justice is simply the health of the soul. Injustice, then, is a kind of sickness, an inner civil war.
Okay, but if that's the goal, a perfectly ordered soul, how do you actually create citizens like that? How do you raise these golden-souled philosopher-kings? This question leads us to Plato's fourth idea, and it's a system of education that is, to put it mildly, radical and pretty controversial. To shape the souls of the future guardians, Plato argues that the state has to have total control over their education from birth. And yes, that means extreme censorship. The epic poems of Homer that show the gods fighting or heroes being afraid of death, banned. Even certain kinds of music are forbidden because they might stir up the warm emotions. Every story, every melody has to be carefully crafted to build a soul that is courageous, balanced, and orderly. This intense focus on controlling culture gets at Plato's fifth major idea, his deep, deep distrust of art. He argues that most art, especially poetry and drama, is actually dangerous. Why? Because a painting of a bed is just a copy of a real bed, which is already just an imperfect copy of the perfect form of a bed. That means the artwork is 3 times removed from the truth. And even worse, it appeals to the lowest parts of our soul, our emotions, our appetites, which undermines the rule of reason. So from philosopher-kings and the shadows on a cave wall to a 3-part soul and the censorship of art, Plato's ideas are just as mind-bending as they are controversial. The Republic gives us this incredible vision of a perfect society, but it also forces us to grapple with a really tough, timeless question. What is the real price of creating a utopia? And is that a price we should ever be willing to pay?